Professor Akram here, and in this tutorial I'm going to be going over the Unity Workspace, customizing your workspace, and a few preferences for Unity. We are using Unity 2021.3, the current LTS of the recording of this video, and if you're familiar with previous versions of Unity, you'll notice right off the bat that the workspace has had a bit of a makeover. We're going to start by taking a look at the Scenes tab. The Scenes tab shows you all the assets that are currently in the scene. And you can think of scenes as game levels, but they don't necessarily have to be. They're just scenes within the games, cutscenes, mini games, whatever the case may be. Now the Scene tab, like I said, shows you everything that is in your scene. And by default, the default scene that loads with a project has a main camera and a directional light, which is over here. Now, to navigate the Scene tab, you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. You can hold down the right button to sort of angle up and rotate around the scene. And you can press the mouse button down to pan around the scene. You'll notice that as I did this, these little items here lit up, and this is our navigation toolbar. If you're familiar with past versions of Unity, the navigation toolbar was actually docked up here at the very top of the editor. In the latest LTS, the navigation toolbar has its own little tab that is locked inside the scene view. Now you can see that we have the view tool, which is basically a panning tool. You have a move tool, rotate, scale, or rect tool, and transform tool. Now these can actually be accessed using keyboard shortcuts. I can use the Q key to click into pan view, W to go into the move tool, E for rotate, R for scale, T for the rectangle, and Y for the transform. This little tool set, while maybe conveniently located here, and again, if you're used to using the keyboard shortcuts, it's just a visual distraction in my opinion. So I'm going to move this tools bar up here to the top of the Scene tab, just so that it's out of the way. Now, as I mentioned before, all of our objects inside of our scene show up here in the scene view. If I go into game view, this is what the player is actually seeing. We don't have actually any visual objects. We have a camera and a light, but they don't provide any visual assets for the game player. In the game view here, there are some items to be aware of. The first and most important is the ratio of what we're looking at. We're just looking at a free aspect ratio, so it's just kind of assuming what our game view is going to be looking like. I would recommend that you always view your project in whatever view you're outputting at. So if that's full 1080 or if just a 16:9 ratio. I like to do a 16:9 aspect. And so this will give me a better understanding of what the player is actually going to be seeing, noticing that it's cropped some of the sides. This ensures that whatever I want in view of the camera for the player is going to accurately display based on their resolution. And again, I like to do a 16:9 aspect ratio just so I can get a better sense overall, regardless if they're at a 1920 by 1080 or maybe say a 1280 by 720 resolution. So with that said, that is the Game tab. Going back into Scene tab, like I said before, this is everything that is in your scene. To see a list of items that are in your scene and to access them, this is where the Hierarchy tab comes into play. In the Hierarchy tab, we have the main camera, as I mentioned before, and the directional light. These come defaulted in your scene. You can always add new objects into your hierarchy by accessing them from your assets or creating them directly from the hierarchy. So for example, if I wanted to add an object to the hierarchy here, I can just right click, choose create 3D object here, and I'm going to just add a cube just to see what's happening. So here it's going to show me that it's been created a cube. It's giving me the option to rename this if I want. I'm not going to at the moment. But if I go back into game view, you can see that it's positioned it some arbitrary location inside of our scene. Now, again, inside the hierarchy, if I select the object, it is selected in my scene view, and I can start to manipulate this within the scene, rotating it, moving it, just like we showed before. However, if I wanted to be more precise or wanted to give the object more settings, we have our inspector window. The inspector window provides all the properties for any of the objects that are currently in your scene. So again, I have the cube selected. So up here, I can choose whether or not I want to name the cube something other than cube. The little check mark here indicates whether the object is active or inactive. If I uncheck this, it becomes deactivated, meaning it's no longer visible within the game or the scene. If I check it again, it has become active. All objects inside of Unity are referred to as game objects, and all game objects have a transform property on them. You'll notice the transform lists their position, rotation, and scale. Now, in this case, you'll notice that it has some arbitrary position. We can always set the position to 0, 0 and manipulate it from there. 0, 0 is the centermost point of our scene, and everything is created outbound from that 0, 0 position. I can type 0, 0, 0 here, or I can just do a transform reset. And this will reset our X, Y, and Z position to 0, 0, 0, and our scale of 1, 1, and 1. And I'm just going to increase the size of the inspector here just a little bit. Now, everything in Unity is measured in meters, so our cube here at a scale of 1 to 1 to 1 is exactly 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. Now, looking at the inspector, all of these properties down here are known as components. Components are behaviors and properties that are applied to the object. For example, our cube comes defaulted with a box collider. The box collider is simply a component that tells where the areas of collision are for the object. Going back over to our hierarchy here, if I click on the main camera, we will notice that the inspector updates with different components, properties, and settings. So again, the camera has a camera component that has a different variables and settings that can be changed. As I mentioned earlier, all components have a transform, which is their location in the scene, as well as rotation and scale. Moving to our next tab down here, we have the project window tab. The project window has all of our assets that are a part of the project. Any models, scripts, anything that we want to bring into our project. Currently, since this is a default project, we have a scenes folder that is created automatically, and you will see that it shows the sample scene. The sample scene is the scene that we're currently working on. And we know that because in our hierarchy window, it shows us here that we are working on the sample scene. It also shows us up here at the very top of our editor, the scene name that we're currently working on. It is best practice to keep our project window organized with folders so that we can quickly access and know where all our assets are. I'm going to right click in here and add a few new folders. So right click, create folder. I'm going to create a folder called scripts. This is going to be where all of our C# scripts go. I'm going to create a new folder called prefabs. This is going to be our prefabs, which are objects that we can reuse again and again within the scene. I'm going to create a new folder called materials, and this will be materials for some of the objects that we're going to be creating. I'm going to create a new folder called audio, and this will be any of the audio that we're going to be creating. Now I can continue on creating folders to organize the assets within the project window. To create an asset, there are a couple of different ways to do that depending on the type of asset that you want to create. So in this case of a C# script, I could right click in here, do create, and create a C# script. And so these are all the types of assets that I can create within the project window currently inside of Unity. But for example, if I have an external asset, let's say an art asset or an audio asset, and I want to bring it into my project, I can do this two ways. For example, now I can continue on creating folders to organize the assets within the project window. To create an asset, there are a couple of different ways to do that depending on the type of asset that you want to create. So in this case of a C# script, I could right click in here, do create, and create a C# script. And so these are all the types of assets that I can create within the project window currently inside of Unity. But for example, if I have an external asset, let's say an art asset or an audio asset, and I want to bring it into my project, I can do this two ways. For example, I can load up Windows Explorer here, and I have this audio file that I want to incorporate into my project. So I can either A, click and drag it into my project window here and put it inside of my audio folder. And you can see right away that just by dragging and dropping it into the project window, it has put a copy of that file inside of my assets folder. Another way to do that is to go directly to the project folder from Windows Explorer. So you'll notice that I have my Hello World project right here, and if I double click on the Hello World project, you can see that this loads up my Unity project, all the folders that are included in the project build, and I specifically want to access the assets. That is where the project window is looking. So if I go to the assets folder, you can now see all of the folders that I have created within the project window. And I could have conversely gone into the audio folder and pasted the audio clip there. Now it's already showing up here because we dragged and dropped it, and it automatically updated in Windows Explorer as well. A few of the last little tabs to explore are the console tab. The console tab is the built-in editor console, which will output messages as you are working on things. If you have any errors in your script, it'll load up here. If you are trying to display something to console for debugging and such, it'll appear here in the console window. Also, we have the Asset Store window. This is just basically a little web browser that allows us to access the Asset Store, and it has actually no longer been a part of the editor. We have to actually need to go into the browser to access the Asset Store. So this is more of a remnant of previous versions where you could access that inside of here, but this is now just sort of creating a button to open it up inside of the browser. And that is a quick overview of the Unity Workspace. We are currently actually looking at the default layout for the position of all our Workspace items. You can, however, change this up. If I go into default over here, you can see that we're looking at the default layout for the workspace, but I can change this to a variety of different styles and setups. For example, I can do a 4x4 split, I can do a 2x3 split, I can do a tall layout, and I can do a wide layout. I'm actually going to do a custom layout. I'm going to start with the tall layout here because that puts my inspector window over to the side and it moves my hierarchy right beside my inspector window. And I really like that because it makes it easy to click on an object and immediately be right there where the properties are. It also puts my project window down here underneath the hierarchy, so I have access to the objects in the scene as well as all my other assets. However, by default, the project window is using a sort of icon-based display with a folder management navigation bar. And I like using a more compact view of the project window just to take up less space and be able to navigate it a little bit easier. So with that said, if we go to our project window and click on these little three dots, we can choose a 2-column or a 1-column. I'm just going to choose the 1-column layout. And when I do that, I immediately get changed to a text-based layout similar to our hierarchy. This again is great if you are familiar with what you're looking at and you don't necessarily need little previews of the items, although it does give a little tiny icon symbol there. I'm also going to move this in a little bit to give us more room in our scene view. And of course I have my scene view and my game view selected. One item that I do not have turned on anymore because we changed layouts is our console window. So I'm going to go up to window, and again, any of our panels can be accessed in the Windows panels layout here. And this is choosing all of the panels that I currently have opened, and I can change those up or select them. But what I do want to open up is our console. And our console is going to be under general items here and console. And that's just going to open up a free floating window. I want to dock this console down here to the bottom of my scene view, just like so. And again, because I've reset the workspace, our little move tools, our navigation tools within our scene has been undocked. So I'm going to redock it here to my scenes. Now that I have the layout set up exactly like I prefer seeing it, I can save this layout. So going back up to my workspace tab, I can go ahead and tell it to save the layout. I can tell it what I want to call it. I'm going to call it Akram's layout. Save. And now I can always go back to my layout whenever I want. And again, this is my preference for setting up the Unity workspace. Once you've got your workspace set up to your liking, there are a few Unity preferences that you're going to want to set up before you get started really using the Unity editor. And one of the preferences is going to make your life a whole lot easier, and that is in regards to play mode. As I mentioned before, the scene view shows you everything that is in your game scene. If I go into the game view tab, this is everything that the player sees. You'll notice up at the top we have a play button and a pause button and a forward button. This is a playtesting mode. So if I had some interactive things going on here, I could hit play mode here, and it will take a few moments and basically build a preview of the game. So I could test out everything and see what the player's actually seeing. You'll notice that when I do that, everything kind of turns a little bit dark gray by default, kind of indicating that I'm in play mode. Now, as I'm playing the game and I decide, you know what, this cube's just too small, I want to come over here and change it. So I can increase the size in my inspector window, making changes to it. But keep in mind, I'm currently still in play mode because everything's kind of grayed out and the play mode is highlighted. If I uncheck play mode and go back, all of those settings that I changed have now reverted back. Anything that you do in play mode is just a preview, kind of showing you what if you made these changes. Because the default color for play mode is so subtle, it's easy to go into play mode and forget that you're still in play mode, make a ton of changes to the inspector properties, and then realize you were in play mode the whole time and none of those changes are going to save once you exit out of play mode. So to avoid heartbreak, we are going to change the color of play mode. So I'm going to go up to Edit and Preferences. This is going to open up our Preferences tab that has a lot of different settings that we can change to manipulate the editor in certain ways. In our case, we're going to go to the Colors tab, and you can see here that it says Play Mode Tint. And this is the color that gets tinted when we go into play mode. And I like using some sort of really bright, obvious color like red, and I can just click on that and change it. And again, you've got other colors for other settings, but the big one, especially when you're first getting started, the play mode tint is important. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of preferences, and if I go back into play mode now, as you can see, the entire interface turns red, indicating to me that I am in play mode, and right away I know that if I make any changes in the inspector, they're not going to be capped when I exit play mode. So that is one of the very first preferences that you want to set. Another preference that you're going to want to set, if I go back into edit and preferences, is our external tools. Our external tools will tell us what IDE we're going to be using for scripting. And if we click on this drop down, you can tell it to open by file extension, for example, or in our case, we're going to set it directly to Microsoft Visual Studio 2019. And when you first install Unity, you're able to install Visual Studio at the same time. If for some reason it didn't get installed, you can always go to Visual Studio's website and download the 2019 community version, and that is exactly what I have here. And we are using Visual Studio Community and not Visual Studio Code. You will want to set this up because what that will do is tell Visual Studio that you are connecting to Unity, and it'll associate all our Unity scripts with Visual Studio so that it debugs and properly reads those files as a project within Visual Studio. So make sure that that is selected as well. And once you've got that selected, all you have to do is exit out of your external tools. And that is pretty much a quick overview of setting up your workspace and a few preferences to get you started using the Unity editor.
I hope you found this lesson informative. And don't forget to check out other lessons and tutorials on the channel. So what are you waiting for? Get creative today.